Right, I'm at the hour, so about to first things first. Big shout out to Abe for having reached a 20 streak, which at this point is genuinely wild. Uh, I'll make a note now that if I ever get to the point where I unlock VIP, Abe is immediately getting it. And Abe, if you ever want like a sword or whatever, let me know. You're a real one. You have special powers and privileges here. I've decided. Second thing second, before we start, Lamp is trying a new thing where he reckons that a big reason I might have been struggling lately is because there's not good ventilation in here. And so what he's done is he's opened up what he calls a ventilation shaft, which just is a big hole in the ceiling that just goes to the outside. Like all the way straight up to somewhere in the world above. Which, before anyone asks, yes, I have tried to climb out of. There are magical shields preventing it, sadly. Oh, it's no problem at all, Abbe. Like, what you call it? Twitch hates lurkers, I don't. Fundamentally, this is, like, the format I do isn't good for, like, a lot of interaction and chatting, really. So you turn up every time, like, is more than I can possibly ask for. And a 20 streak is crazy. I do appreciate it. But yeah, so you might hear some weird noises coming through, and the quality of the audio might change a little bit. Also, it seems to have agitated some of the beasts, so there might be a bit more like banging around and background noise than usual. So, if you hear any of that and it's a problem, let me know and I'll see what I can do about it. But yeah, just want to get out of the way. What else? What else? I don't think there's anything else. But then I remembered that we do have like Lamp's new policies that I got to do a good 5 minutes of sort of nattering and waffling so that people have a chance to arrive. So, what else can we talk about? I haven't really been up to. I guess there is something I've been up to that's interesting today. So I haven't found any new books lately, but I have been working because Lamp has decided that because the library is starting to get not full, but like you can see that there's books in places. He's worried that one day it is going to get full. And so his solution to this is he started having me make another set of bookshelves on the other side of this room. So one day when all these is full up, that's probably where we're gonna go. We'll just turn the camera around and we'll be on the other side of the room, which that'll be interesting. I hope. So that's something that's happening. What else? I don't really know what else to talk about. I mean, I've been scavenging lumber most of the day, if I'm honest. But, that's interesting. I always find it fascinating how much like stuff people can get done. Because, like, I spent most of the day getting a single plank of wood. Because, like, I mean, the way I'm sure a person would do it is they'd use, like, an hammer and they'd, like, shim it off and they'd knock the nails out. But I don't have hands and leverage. So what I had to do is I had to get a little sort of wedge. And when I say it's like I used a couple of daggers that are less cursed than most of them, and I would push them into like the gap between the board and the other board that we're nailed into, and then I'd push them in as far as I could, and then I'd go to the other side and I'd lever, and then I'd wedge that lever up with something. I'd go back, I'd push them further, and I'd do this over and over again until the ball would come out. And this was an old board attached to a fallen over shelf, so I had to do this 3 times to get it off. And then I couldn't get the nails out, so I just had to gnaw through the bits where the nails are sticking through. I didn't take the ones out of the middle though, because when I go to build my shelves, I've got an idea that I'm gonna sort of put another plank on them and then build from there. So that's what's going on with me. And I spent 6 hours doing that one plank. Yeah, I do not recommend going into like construction and furniture making as a rat. Really not sort of your wheelhouse. Like, even the tiny furniture I didn't make that tiny furniture. Lamp made that, like, with magic really easily. Which I think he could also do for the shelves if he wanted to, but he just doesn't. Nazgul's right, I am starting to build up more resentment against Lamp. It's important. He deserves it. I'm allowed to be angry. And as long as I'm angry in a way that doesn't involve not doing what he tells me to do, the second he tells me to do it, I still get cheese, so it's fine. But yeah, Okay, that's 5 past the hour. That's probably enough waffling. Lamp wants me to do 10, but 10 is a lot. I don't have a lot to talk about. I'm just a rat. I don't got anything going on. Lord, I don't know what he expects me to fill time with. I just talked about like gnawing a plank of wood for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. Anyhow, so today we've got, well, we're going back to the Pearl by Steinbeck, which is, I think there's about 50 pages of it left. I sort of struggled a bit last time for some reason, which I think was the ventilation thing Lamp said, so hopefully that won't be the case today, but even if it is, my plan is to push through and just finish it, because I don't know, it's not very long. Like, even pushing it to 2 sort of sessions feels like a lot. It's weird, I've been struggling more lately with the sort of longer ones. I was doing 6 hours pretty easily earlier on, but yeah, I think it is just the air quality and things, and the heat and stuff, so hopefully we'll push through. A little drink of water ahead of time, trying to be better about taking drinks more regular. And yeah, so what are we doing? Alright, so as always, if you miss, or if I miss something, or I've said something you haven't understood, or even if you just have a little bit of a like technical issue and you miss something, let me know. I'm happy to go back over it. If you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to let me know. Always happy to have a chat. I'll try and keep an eye out for the ad breaks. Apparently they're not being like done very consistently, so I don't know if you're getting them or not. But when the bot tells me that there are ads on, I will try and take a break from the text and just chat for a bit. Yeah, I think that's about it really. So without any further ado, let us begin. Chapter the 4th. It is wonderful the way a little town keeps track of itself and of all its units. If every single man and woman, child and baby, acts and conducts itself in a known pattern, and breaks no rules and differs with no one, and experiments in no way, and is not sick, and does not endanger the ease and peace of mind, or steady unbroken flow of the town, then that unit can disappear and never be heard of. But let one man step out of the regular thought, or the known and trusted pattern, and the nerves of the town people ring with nervousness, and communication travels over the nerve lines of the town. Then every unit communicates to the whole. Thus in La Paz, it was known that in the early morning, through the old town, that Kino were going to sell his pearl that day. It was known among the neighbours in the brush huts, among the pearl fishermen. It was known among the Chinese grocery store owners. It was known in the church, for the altar boys whispered about it. Word of it crept in among the nuns. The beggars in front of the church spoke of it, for they would be there to take the tithe of the first fruits of the luck. The little boys knew about it with excitement, but most of all the pearl buyers knew about it. And when the day had come, and the officers of the pearl buyers, each man sat alone with his little black velvet tray, and each man rolled the pearls about with his fingertips and considered his part in the picture. It was supposed that the pearl buyers were individuals acting alone, bidding against one another for pearls the fishermen brought in. And once it had been so. But this were a wasteful method, for often, in the excitement of bidding for a fine pearl, too great a price had been paid to the fishermen. This were extravagant, and not to be countenanced. Now there were only one pearl buyer, with many hands, and the men who sat in their offices and waited for Kino knew what price they would offer, how high they would bid, and what method each one would use. And although these men would not profit beyond their salaries, there were excitement among the pearl buyers. There were excitement in the hunt, and if it be a man's function to break down a price, then he must take joy and satisfaction in breaking it as far down as possible. For every man in the world functions to the best of his ability, and no one does less than his best, no matter what he may think about it. Quite apart from any reward they might get, from any word of praise, from any promotion, a pearl buyer were a pearl buyer, and the best and happiest pearl buyer was he who bought for the lowest prices. The sun was hot yellow that morning, and it drew the moisture from the estuary and from the Gulf and hung it in shimmering scarves in the air, so the air vibrated and vision were insubstantial. A vision hung in the air to the north of the sea, the vision of a mountain that were over 200 miles away, and the high slopes of this mountain were swaddled with pines, and a great stone peak arose above the timberline. And the morning of this day, the canoes lined up on the beaches. The fishermen did not go out to dive for pearls, for there would be too much happening, too many things to see when Kino went to sell the great pearl. In the brush houses by the shore, Kino's neighbours sat long over their breakfasts, and they spoke of what they would do if they had found the pearl. And one man said that he would give it as a present to the Holy Father in Rome. Another said that he would buy masses for the souls of his family for 1,000 years. Another thought he might take the money and distribute it among the poorer La Paz. And a fourth thought of all the good things one could do with the money from the pearl, of all the charities, benefits, of all the rescues one could perform if one had money. All of the neighbours hoped that sudden wealth would not turn Kino's head, would not make a rich man of him, would not graft onto him the evil limbs of greed, hatred and coldness. But Kino were a well-liked man. It would be a shame if the pearl destroyed him. That good wife Juana, they said, and the beautiful baby Coyotita, and the others to come. What a pity it would be if the pearl should destroy them all. For Kino and Juana, this were the morning of mornings of their lives, comparable only to the day when the baby had been born. This would be the day from which all other days would take their arrangement. Uster would say, "It was 2 years before we sold the pearl," or "It was 6 weeks after we sold the pearl." Juana, considering the matter, threw caution to the winds, and she dressed Coyotito in the clothes which she had prepared for his baptism, when there would be money for his baptism. And Juana combed and braided her hair, and tied the ends with 2 little bows of red ribbon, and she put on her marriage skirt and waist. The sun would quarter hour when they were ready. Kino's ragged white clothes were clean at least, and this was the last day of his raggedness. But tomorrow, or even this afternoon, he would have new clothes. The neighbours, watching Kino's door through the crevices in their brush houses, were dressed and ready too. There were no self-consciousness about their joining Kino and Juana to go pearl selling. It were expected. It were an historic moment. They'd be crazy if they didn't go. It would be almost a sign of unfriendship. Juana put on her head shawl carefully, and she draped one long end under her right elbow, and gathered it with her right hand, so the hammock hung under her arm. And in this little hammock she placed Coyotito, propped up against the head shawl, so that he could see everything, and perhaps remember. Kino put on his large straw hat, and felt it with his hand to see that it were properly placed, not on the back or side of his head, like a rash, unmarried, irresponsible man, and not flat as an elder would wear it, but tilted a little forward to show aggressiveness and seriousness and vigour. There is a great deal to be seen in the tilt of an hat on a man. Kino slipped his feet into his sandals, and pulled the thongs up over his heels. The great pearl were wrapped in an old soft piece of deerskin, and placed in a little leather bag, and the leather bag were in a pocket in Kino's shirt. He folded his blanket carefully, and draped it in a narrow strip over his left shoulder, and now they was ready. Kino stepped with dignity out of the house, and Juana followed him, carrying Coyotito. And as they marched up the freshest washed alley towards the town, the neighbours joined them. The houses belched people, the doorways spilled out children, but because of the seriousness of the occasion, only one man walked with Kino, and that was his brother, Juan Tomás. Juan Tomás cautioned his brother. "You must be careful to see they do not cheat you," he said. And, "Very careful," Kino agreed. "We do not know what prices are paid in other places," said Juan Tomás. "How can we know what is a fair price if we do not know what the pearl buyers get for the pearls in another place?" "That is true," said Kino, "but how can we know? We are here, we are not there." As they walked up towards the city, the crowd grew behind them, and Juan Tomás, in pure nervousness, went on speaking. "Before you were born, Kino," he said, "the old ones thought of a way to get more money for their pearls. They thought it would be better if they had an agent who took all the pearls to the capital and sold them there and kept only his share of the profit." Kino nodded his head. "I know," he said, "it were a good thought." "And so they got such a man," said Juan Tomás, "and they pulled their pearls, and they started him off, and he were never heard of again, and the pearls were lost. Then they got another man, and they started him off, and he were never heard of again. And so they gave the old thing up and went back the old way." "I know," said Kino. "I have heard our father tell of it. It were a good idea, but it were against religion, and the father made that very clear. The loss of the pearl were a punishment visited on those who tried to leave their station, and the father made it clear that each man and woman is like a soldier sent by God to guard some part of the castle of the universe. And some are in the ramparts, and some are far deep in the darkness of the walls. But each one must remain faithful to his post, and must not go running about, as the castle is in danger from the assaults of hell. I have heard him make that sermon, said Juan Tomas. He makes it every year. The brothers, as they walked along, squinted their eyes a little, as they and their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers had done for 400 years, since first the strangers came with arguments and authority and gunpowder to back up both. And in the 400 years, Kino's people had learned only one defence, a slight slitting of the eyes and a slight tightening of the lips and a retirement. Nothing could break down this wall, and they could remain whole within the wall. The gathering procession was solemn, but they sensed the importance of this day, and any children who showed a tendency to scuffle, to scream, to cry out, to steal hats and rumple hair were risked to silence by their elders. So important was this day that an old man come to see, riding on the stalwart shoulders of his nephew. The procession left the brush huts and entered the stone and plaster city where the streets were a little wider, and there were narrow pavements beside the building. And as before, the beggars joined them as they passed the church. The grocers looked out at them as they went by. The little saloons lost their customers, and the owners closed up shop and went along. And the sun beat down in the street of the city, and even tiny stones threw shadows on the ground. The news of the approach of the procession ran ahead of it, and in the little dark offices the pearl bars stiffened and grew alert. They got out papers so that they could be at work when Kino appeared, and they put their pearls in their desks, for it is not good to let an inferior pearl be seen beside a beauty. And word of the loveliness of Kino's pearl had come to them. The pearl bars' offices were clustered together in one narrow street, and they were barred at the windows, and wooden slats cut out the light, so that only a soft gloom entered the offices. A stout, slow man sat in an office waiting. His face was fatherly and benign, and his eyes twinkled with friendship. He recalled her good mornings, a ceremonious shaker of hands, a jolly man, who knew all jokes, and yet hovered close to sadness. For in the midst of a laugh he could remember the death of your aunt, and his eyes could become wet with sorrow for your loss. This morning he had placed a flower in a vase on his desk, a single scarlet hibiscus, and the vase sat beside the black velvet-lined pearl tray in front of him. He was shaved close to the blue roots of his beard, and his hands were clean and his nails polished. His door stood open in the morning, and he hummed under his breath while his right hand practised leisure de main. He rolled a corn back and forth over his knuckles, and made it appear and disappear, made it spin and sparkle. The corn winked into sight, and as quickly slipped out of sight, and the man did not even watch his own performance. The fingers did it all mechanically, precisely, while the man hummed to himself, and peered out the door. Then he heard the tramp of feet of the approaching crowd, and the fingers of his right hand worked faster and faster, until, as the figure of Kino filled the doorway, the corn flashed and disappeared. "Good morning, my friend," the stout man said. "What can I do for you?" Kino stared into the dimness of the little office, for his eyes were squeezed from the outside glare. But the buyer's eyes had become as steady and cruel as an unblinking. But the buyer's eyes had become steady and uncruel. But the buyer's eyes had become steady and cruel and unwinking as an orc's eyes, while the rest of his face smiled in greeting, and secretly behind his desk his right hand practised with the coin. "I have a pearl," said Kino, and Juan Tomas stood beside him and snorted a little at the understatement. The neighbours peered around the doorway, and a line of little boys clambered on the window bars and looked through. Several little boys, on their hands and knees, watched the scene around Kino's legs. "You have a pearl," the dealer said. "Sometimes a man brings in a dozen. Well, let us see your pearl. We will value it and give you the best price." And his fingers worked furiously with the coin. Now Kino instinctively knew his own dramatic effect. Slowly he brought out the leather bag. Slowly he took from it the soft and dirty piece of deerskin, and then he let the great pearl roll into the black velvet tray, and instantly his eyes went to the buyer's face. There was no sign, no movement. The face did not change, but the secret hand behind the desk missed it in its precision. The coin stumbled over a knuckle and slipped silently into the dealer's lap, and the fingers behind the desk curled into a fist. When the right hand came out of hiding, the forefingers touched the great pearl, rolled it on the black velvet. Thumb and forefinger picked it up and brought it near the dealer's eyes and twirled it in the air. Kino held his breath, and the neighbours held their breath, and the whispering went back through the crowd. "He's inspecting it. No price has been mentioned yet. They have not come to a price." Now the dealer's hand had become a personality. The hand tossed the great pearl back in the tray. The forefinger poked and insulted it, and on the dealer's face there came a sad and contemptuous smile. "I am sorry, my friend," he said, and his shoulders rose a little to indicate the misfortune was no fault of his. "It is a pearl of great value," said Kino. The dealer's fingers spurned the pearl so that it bounced and rounded softly from the side of the velvet tray. "You have heard of fool's gold," the dealer said. "This pearl is like fool's gold. It is too large. Who would buy it? There is no market for such things. It is a curiosity only. I am sorry. You thought it was a thing of value, and it is only a curiosity." Now Kino's face was perplexed and worried. "It is the pearl of the world," he cried. "No one has ever seen such a pearl." "On the contrary," said the dealer, "it is large and clumsy. As a curiosity it has interest. Some museums might perhaps take it to place in a collection of seashells. I can give you, say, 1,000 pesos. Kino's face grew dark and dangerous. "It is worth 50,000, he said. "You know it. You want to cheat me." And the dealer heard a little grumble go through the crowd as they heard his price, and the dealer felt a little tremor of fear. "Do not blame me," he said quickly. "I am only an appraiser. Ask the others. Go to their offices and show your pearl. Or better, let them come here so that you can see there is no collusion. Boy," he called, and when a servant looked through the door, "Boy, go to such a one, and such another one, and such a third one. Ask them to step in here, and do not tell them why. Just say that I would be pleased to see them." And his right hand went behind the desk and pulled another coin from his pocket, and the coin rolled back and forth over the knuckles. Kino's neighbours whispered together. They had been afraid of something like this. The pearl was large, but it had a strange colour. They had been suspicious of it from the first. After all, 1,000 pesos were not to be thrown away. It was comparative wealth to a man who were not wealthy. And suppose Kino took 1,000 pesos. Only yesterday he had had nothing. But Kino had grown tight and hard. He felt the creeping of fate, the circling of the walls, the hover of vultures. He felt the evil coagulating about him, and he was helpless to protect himself. He heard in his ears the evil music, and on the black velvet the great pearl glistened, so that the dealer could not keep his eyes from it. The crowd in the doorway wavered and broke, and let the 3 pearl dealers through. The crowd was silent now, fearing to miss a word, or fail to see a gesture and expression. Kino was silent and watchful. He felt a little tugging at his back, and he turned and looked in Juana's eyes, and when he looked away he had renewed strength. The dealers did not glance at one another, nor at the pearl. The man behind the desk said, "I have put a value on this pearl. The owner here does not think it fair. I will ask you to examine this thing and make an offer. Notice," he said to Kino, "I have not mentioned what I have offered." The first dealer, dry and stringy, seemed now to see the pearl for the first time. He took it up, rolled it quickly between thumb and forefinger, and then cast it contemptuously back into the tray. "Do not include me in the discussion," he said dryly. "I will make no offer at all. I do not want it. This is not a pearl, it is a monstrosity." His thin lips curled. Now the second dealer, a little man with a soft voice, took up the pearl, and he examined it carefully. He took a glass from his pocket and inspected it under magnification. Then he laughed softly. "Better pearls are made of paste," he said. "I know these things. This is soft and chalky. It will lose its colour and die in a few months. Look." He offered the glass to Kino, showed him how to use it, and Kino, who had never seen a pearl surface magnified, was shocked at the strange-looking surface. The third dealer took the pearl from Kino's hands. "One of my clients. Hey, Nesca. Good to have you. Where are we? We're a little ways into the first chapter back to chapter 4, and we are currently in the midst of the big pearl being appraised by the pearl buyers of the town, who we know, but Kino does not know, are all work for the same man and have colluded and fixed the price beforehand. And they're currently making a show of not actually being colluded by having them brought in and not discuss things and do their pre-arranged roles. The third dealer took the pearl from Kino's hands. "One of my clients likes such things," he said. "I will offer 500 pesos, and perhaps I can sell it to my client for 600. Kino reached quickly and snatched the pearl from his hand. He wrapped it in the deerskin and thrust it inside his shirt. The man behind the desk said, I'm a fool, I know, but my first offer stands. I still offer 1,000. What are you doing? He asked, as Kino thrust the pearl out of sight. I'm cheated, Kino cried fiercely. My pearl is not for sale here. I'll go, perhaps even to the capital. Now the dealers glanced quickly at one another. They knew they had played too hard. They knew they would be disciplined for their failure. And the man at the desk said quickly, I might go to 1,500. Kino was pushing his way through the crowd. The hum of talk came to him dimly, his rage blood pounded in his ears, and he burst through and strode away. Juana followed, trotting after him. When the evening came, the neighbours in the brush houses sat eating their corn cakes and beans, and they discussed the great theme of the morning. They did not know, it seemed, the fine pearl to them, but they had never seen such a pearl before, and surely the dealers knew more about the value of pearls than they. And mark this, they said, those dealers did not discuss things. Each one there knew the pearl were valueless. I suppose they had arranged it before. If that is so, then all of us have been cheated all of our lives. Perhaps, I argued, perhaps it would have been better if Kino took 1,500 pesos. That is a great deal of money, more than he has ever seen. Maybe Kino is being a pig-headed fool. Suppose he should really go to the capital and find no buyer for his pearl. He would never live that down. And now, said other fearful ones, now that he had defied them, those buyers will not want to deal with him at all. Maybe Kino has cut off his own head and destroyed himself. And others said Kino is a brave man and a fierce man. He is right. From his courage we may all profit. These were proud of Kino. In his house, Kino squatted on his sleeping mat, brooding. He had buried his pearl under the stone of the fire hole in his house, and he stared at the woven twills of his sleeping mat until the cross designs danced in his head. He had lost one world and had not gained another. And Kino were afraid. Never in his life had he even far from his house. He were afraid of strangers and of strange places. He were terrified of that monster of strangeness they called the capital. It lay over the water and through the mountains, over 1,000 miles, and every strange, terrible mile were affrighting him. But Kino had lost his old world, and he must clamber on to a new one. His dream of the future were real, and never to be destroyed. And he had said, I will go, and that made a real thing too. To determine to go and to say it would be halfway there. Juana watched him while he buried his pearl, and she watched him while she cleaned Coyotito and nursed him. And Juana made the corn cakes for supper. Juan Tomas came in and squatted down beside Kino and remained silent for a long time, until at last Kino demanded, what else could I do? They are cheats. Juan Tomas nodded gravely. He were the elder, and Kino looked to him for wisdom. It is hard to know, he said. We do know that we are cheated from birth to the overcharge on our coffins, but we survive. You have defied not the pearl bars, but the old structure, the old way of life, and I am afraid for you. What have I to fear but starvation? Kino answered. But Juan Tomas shook his head slowly. That we must all fear. I suppose you're correct. Suppose your pearl is of great value. Do you think then the game is over? What do you mean? I don't know, said Juan Tomas. But I'm afraid for you. It is new ground you are walking on. You do not know the way. I will go. I will go soon, said Kino. Yes, said Juan Tomas agreed. That you must do. But I wonder if you will find it any different in the capital. Here you have friends, and me, your brother. There you will have no one. What can I do? Kino cried. Some deep outrage is here. My son must have a chance. That is what they are striking at. My friends will protect me. Only so long as they are not in danger or discomfort from it, said Juan Tomas. He arose, saying, Go with God. And Kino said, Go with God. And they did not even look up, for the words had a strange chill in them. Long after Juan Tomas had gone, Kino sat brooding on his sleeping mat. A lethargy had settled on him, and a little grey hopelessness. Every road seemed blocked against him. In his head he heard only the dark music of the enemy. His senses were burningly alive, but his mind went back to the deep participation with all things, the gift he had from his people. He heard every little sound of the gathering night, the sleepy complaint of the settling birds, the love agony of cats, the strike and withdrawal of little waves on the beach, and the simple hiss of distance. and he could smell the sharp odour of exposed kelp from the receding tide. The little flare of the twig fire made the design on his sleeping mat jump before his entranced eyes. Juana watched him with worry, but she knew him, and she knew she could help him best by being silent, and by being near. And as though she too could hear the song of evil, she fought it, singing softly the melody of the family, of the safety and warmth and wholeness of the family. She held Coyotito in her arms and sang the song to him, to keep the evil out, and her voice was brave against the threat of the dark music. Kino did not move, nor ask for his supper. She knew he would ask when he wanted it. His eyes were entranced, and he could sense the wary, watchful evil outside the brush house. He could feel the dark, creeping things waiting for him to go out into the night. It was shadowy and dreadful, and it had called to him, and threatened him, and challenged him. His right hand went into his shirt and felt his knife. His eyes were wide. He stood up and walked to the doorway. Juana willed to stop him. She raised her hand to stop him, and her mouth opened with terror. For a long moment Kino looked out into the darkness, and then he stepped outside. Juana heard the little rush, the grunt and struggle, the blow. She froze with terror for a moment, and then her lip drew back from her teeth like a cat's lips. She set Coyotito down on the ground. She seized a stone from the fireplace and rushed outside. But it were over by then. Kino lay on the ground, struggling to rise, and there were no one near him. Only the shadow and the strike and rush of waves in the eastern distance. But the evil were all about, hidden behind the brush fence, crouched behind the house in the shadow, hovering in the air. Juana dropped her stone, and she put her arms around Kino and helped him to his feet, and supported him into the house. Blood oozed down from his scalp, and there were a long, deep cut in his cheek from ear to chin, a deep bleeding slash. And Kino were only half conscious. He shook his head from side to side. His shirt was torn open and his clothes half pulled off. Juana sat him down on his sleeping mat, and she wiped the thickening blood from his face with her skirt. She brought him pulque to drink in a little pitcher, and still he shook his head to clear out the darkness. "Who?" Juana asked. "I don't know," Kino said. "I didn't see." Now Juana brought a clay pot of water and she washed the cut on his face while he stared dazed ahead of him. "Kino, my husband," she cried, and his eyes stared past her. "Kino, can you hear me?" "I hear you," he said dully. "Kino, this pearl is evil. Let us destroy it before it destroys us. Let us crush it between two stones. Let us throw it back into the sea where it belongs. Kino, it is evil. It is evil." As she spoke, the light came back into Kino's eyes, so they glowed fiercely, and his muscles hardened and his will hardened. "No," he said. "I will fight this thing. I will win over it. We will have our chance." His fist pounded the sleeping mat. "No one should take our good fortune from us," he said. His eyes softened then, and he raised a gentle hand to Juana's shoulder. "Believe me," he said, "I am a man." And his face grew crafty. "In the morning we will take our canoe and we will go over the sea and over the mountains to the capital. You and I. We will not be cheated. I am a man." "Kino," she said huskily, "I am afraid. A man can be killed. Let us throw the pearl back into the sea." "Hush," he said fiercely. "I am a man. Hush." And she was silent, for his voice was command. "Let us sleep a little," he said. "In the first light we will start. You are not afraid to go with me?" "No, my husband." His eyes were soft and warm on her then. His hand touched her cheek. "Let us sleep a little," he said. And that's the end of chapter 4. I'll have my drink of water before we start the commentary. I'm sort of struggling to place Kino here a little bit, because I want to say that he's quite an angry character. I think that's a fair thing to say, because he's driven a lot of his actions by anger. It's a sort of fundamental state of being to him. The way he talks and interacts with the world, the way he deals with the doctor, with the pearl bars, with all of them, is through a lens of anger. But I feel hard to, or I feel it is hard to say that he's an angry person, or character, I should say, because all of his anger is very, very justified. The doctor will not treat his son until he is rich. The pearl bars offer him a paltry sum. Everything is set up to make him fail. For 400 years people have oppressed his people, and all they can do is grin and bear it. In the situation, anger is not unusual, it is not only understandable, it is the only real response available to him. And so I struggle to call Aquino an angry man, though he is driven by anger. The collusion of the pearl buys is pretty clearly despicable, but you know, that's the nature of monopoly. You don't pay a fair price if you don't have to pay a fair price. You pay the least price you can. Well, at least they'll suffer for it, having failed and fumbled the bag. Still, little good it does to Kino, huh? What else is there a note of this chapter? Again, the idea that the pearl is evil, that wealth is evil. Understandable idea, sure, but, well, it's an hard thing to reconcile with, really, the idea of evil, or the evil of wealth in a society driven by it. Still, I think there is at least a small victory here for Kino. The breaking of the pearl buyer, the raising his price to 1500 as he's walking away, it shows at least on some level that he was lying, and there was deceiving. If there's 500 pesos worth of margin, well, that's something at least. But it doesn't prove the 50,000 Kino said. What else? Anything else? Oh yeah, the violence again. The second time Kino's been attacked. Or I guess not attacked, but the second time he's had physical violence done to him. Someone broke into his, well, I guess broke into his house, snuck into his house the night before. And then they waited outside to beat him. Things is getting bad quickly. Still, the capital awaits, and who knows? Big cities is full of opportunity. Though I can say from experience, most of those opportunities is bad ones. Still, nothing to be done. Bit of press on it, so we'll do that. I'll have another drink, and then we'll go. Chapter 5. The late moon arose before the first rooster crowed. Kino opened his eyes in the darkness, for he sensed movement near him, but he did not move. Only his eyes searched the darkness, and in the pale light of the moon that crept through the holes in the brush house, Kino saw Juana arise silently from beside him. He saw her move towards the fireplace. So carefully did she work that he heard only the lightest sound when she moved the fireplace stone. And then, like a shadow, she glided towards the door. She paused for a moment beside the hanging box where Kuyutito lay. Then for a second she were black in the doorway, and then she were gone. And rage surged in Kino. He rolled up to his feet and followed her as silently as she had gone, and he could hear her quick footsteps going towards the shore. Quietly he tracked her, and his brain was red with anger. She burst clear out of the brush line and stumbled over a little boulder towards the water. And then she heard him coming, and she broke into a run. Her arm were up to throw when he leapt at her, and caught her arm, and wrenched the pearl from her. He struck her in the face with his clenched fist, and she fell on the boulders, and he kicked her in the side. In the pale light he could see the little waves break over her, and her skirt floated out, and her skirt floated about and clung to her legs as the water receded. Kino looked down at her, and his teeth were bared. He hissed at her like a snake, and Juana stared at him with a wide, unfrightened eyes, like a sheep before the butcher. She knew there were murder in him, and it were all right. She had accepted it, and she would not resist or even protest. And then the rage left him, and a sick disgust took its place. He turned away from her and walked up the beach and through the brush line. His senses were dulled by his emotion. He heard the rush, got his knife out and lunged at a dark figure, and felt his knife go home. And then he was swept to his knees and swept again to the ground. Greedy fingers went through his clothes, frantic figures searched him, and the pearl, knocked from his hand, lay winking behind a little stone in the pathway. It glittered in the soft moonlight. One had dragged herself up from the rocks on the edge of the water. Her face were a dull pain and her side ached. She steadied herself on her knees for a while, and her wet skirt clung to her. There was no anger in her for Kina. He had said, "I am a man," and that meant certain things to Juana. It meant he were half insane and half God. It meant that Kina would drive his strength against the mountain and plunge his strength against the sea. Juana, in her woman's soul, knew that the mountain would stand while the man broke himself, that the sea would surge while the man drowned in it, and yet it was this thing that made him a man, half insane, half God. And Juana had need of a man. She could not live without a man. Although she might be puzzled by these differences between man and woman, she knew them and accepted them and needed them. Of course she would follow him, there was no question of that. Sometimes the quality of woman, the reason, the caution, the sense of preservation could cut through Kino's manness and save them all. She climbed painfully to her feet, and she dipped her cupped palms in the little waves and washed her bruised face with the stinging salt water. And then she went creeping up the beach after Kino. A flight of herring clouds had moved over the sky from the south. A pale moon dipped in and out of the stands of cloud, so that Juana walked in darkness for a moment, and in light the next. Her back was bent with pain, her head was low. She went through the line of brush when the moon was covered. When it looked through, she saw the glimmer of the great pearl in the path beyond the rock. She sank to her knees and picked it up, and the moon went into the darkness of the cloud again. Juana remained on her knees while she considered whether to go back to the sea and finish her job. And as she considered, the light came again, and she saw the two dark figures lying in the path ahead of her. She leapt forward and saw that one was Kino, and the other a stranger with dark, shiny fluid leaking from his throat. Kino moved sluggishly, arms and legs stirred like those of a crushed bug, and a thick muttering came from his mouth. Now, in an instant, Juana knew that the old life was gone forever. The dead man in the path, and Kino's knife, dark-bladed beside him, convinced her. All the time, Juana had been trying to rescue something from the old piece, the time before the pearl. But now it had gone, and there was no retrieving it. And knowing this, she abandoned the past instantly. There was nothing to do but save themselves. Her pain was gone now, her slowness. Quickly she dragged the dead man from the pathway into the shelter of the brush. She went to Kino and sponged his face with her wet skirt. His senses were coming back and he moaned. "They have taken the pearl. I've lost it. Now it is over," he said. "The pearl is gone." Juana quieted him as she would with a sick child. "Hush," she said. "Here is your pearl. I found it in the path. Can you hear me now? Here is your pearl. Can you understand? You have killed a man. You must go away. They would come for this. Can you understand? We must be gone before the daylight comes." "I was attacked," Kino said uneasily. "I was struck to save my life." "Do you remember yesterday?" Juana asked. "Do you think that will matter? Do you remember the men of the city? Do you think your explanation will help?" Kino drew a great breath and fought off his weakness. "No," he said. "You're right." And his will hardened and he were a man again. "Go to our house and bring Koyotito," he said, "and bring all the corn we have. I will drag the canoe into the water and we will go." He took his knife and left her. He stumbled towards the beach and he came to his canoe. When the light broke through again, he saw that a great hole had been knocked in the bottom, and a searing rage came into him and gave him strength. Now the darkness was closing in on his family. Now the evil music filled the night, hung over the mangroves, sculled in the wave beat. The canoe of his grandfather, plastered over and over, and a splintered hole broken in it. This were an evil beyond thinking. The killing of a man was not so evil as the killing of a boat, for a boat does not have sons, and a boat cannot protect itself, and a wounded boat does not heal. There was sorrow in Kino's rage, but this lasting had tightened him beyond breaking. He were an animal now, for hiding, for attacking, and he lived only to preserve himself and his family. He was not conscious of the pain in his head. He leapt up the beach, through the brush line towards his brush house. and it did not occur to him to take one of the canoes of his neighbours. Never once did the thought enter his head, any more than he could have conceived breaking a boat. The roosters were crowing, and the dawn were not far off. Smoke of the first fires seeped out through the walls of their brush house, and the first smell of cooking corn cakes were in the air. Already the dawn birds were scampering into the bushes. The weak moon was losing its light, and the clouds thickened and curled to the southwest. The wind blew freshly into the estuary, a nervous, restless wind, with the smell of storm on its breath, and there were change and uneasiness in the air. Kino, hurrying towards his house, felt a surge of exhilaration. Now he was not confused, for there was only one thing to do, and Kino's hand went first to the great pearl in his shirt, and then to his knife hanging under his shirt. He saw a little glow ahead of him, and then without interval a tall flame leaped up in the dark, with a crackle and roar, and a tall edifice of fire lighted the pathway. Kino broke into a run. It was his bush house, he knew, and he knew that these houses could burn down in a very few moments. And as he ran, a scuttling figure ran towards him, Juana with Coyotito in her arms, and Kino's shoulder blanket clutched in her hand. The baby moaned with fright, and Juana's eyes were wide and terrified. Kino could see the house were gone, and he did not question Juana. He knew, but she said, "It was torn up and the floor dug. Even the baby's box turned out, and as I looked, they put the fire to the outside." The fierce light of the burning house lighted Kino's face strongly. "Who?" he demanded. "I don't know," she said. "The dark ones." The neighbours were tumbling from their houses now, and they watched the fallen sparks and stamped them out to save their own houses. Suddenly Kino was afraid. The light made him afraid. He remembered the man lying dead in the brush beside the path, and he took Juana by the arm and drew her into the shadow of an house away from the light. The light were a danger to him. For a moment he considered, and then he worked among the shadow until he came to the house of Juan Tomas, his brother, and he slipped into the doorway and drew Juana after him. Outside he could hear the squeal of children and the shouts of the neighbours. His friends thought he might be inside the burning house. The house of Juan Tomas were almost exactly like Kino's house. Nearly all the brush houses were alike, and all leaked light and air, so that Juana and Kino, sitting in the corner of the brother's house, could see the leaping flames through the wall. They saw the flames, tall and furious, and they saw the roof fall, and watched the fire die down as quickly as a twig fire dies. They heard the cries of warning of their friends, and the shrill, keening cry of Apollina, the wife of Juan Tomas. She, being the nearest woman relative, raised a formal lament for the dead of the family. Apollonia realised that she was wearing her second best head shawl, and she rushed to her house to get her fine new one. As she rummaged in a box by the wall, Kino's voice said quietly, "Apollina, do not cry out. We are not hurt." "How do you come here?" she demanded. "Do not question," he said. "Go now to Juan Tomas and bring him here and tell no one else. This is important to us, Apollina." She paused, her hands helpless in front of her, and then, "Yes, my brother-in-law," she said. In a few moments Juan Tomas came back with her. He lighted a candle and come to them when they crouched in the corner, and he said, "Apollina, see to the door, and do not let anyone enter." He rolled her, Juan Tomas, and he assumed the authority. "Now, my brother," he said. "I was attacked in the dark," said Kino, "and in the fight I have killed a man." "Who?" asked Juan Tomas quickly. "I do not know. It is all darkness and shape of darkness." "It is the pearl," said Juan Tomas. "There is a devil in this pearl. You should have sold it and passed off the devil. Perhaps you can still sell it and buy peace for yourself." And Kino said, "Oh, my brother, an insult has been put on me that is deeper than my life. For on the breach my canoe is broken, my house is burned, and in the brush a dead man lies. Every escape is cut off. You must hide us, my brother." And Kino, looking closely, saw deep worry coming into his brother's eyes, and he forestalled him in a possible refusal. "Not for long," he said quickly. "Only until a day has passed and the new night has come. Then we will go." "I will hide you," said Juan Tomas. "I do not want to bring danger to you," Kino said. "I know I am like leprosy. I will go tonight, and then you will be safe." "I will protect you," said Juan Tomas, and he called, "Apollina, close up the door. Do not even whisper that Kino is here." They sat silently all day in the darkness of the house. and they could hear the neighbours speaking of them. Through the walls of the house they could watch the neighbours raking through the ashes to find the bones. Crouching in the house of Juan Tomas, they learned the shock go into their neighbours' minds at the news of the broken boat. Juan Tomas went out among the neighbours to divert their suspicions, and he gave them theories and ideas of what had happened to Kino and Juana and to the baby. To one he said, "I think they had gone south along the coast to escape the evil that was on them," and to another, "Kino would never leave the sea. Perhaps he found another boat." And he said, "Apollina is ill with grief." And in that day the wind rose up to beat the gulf and tore the kelps and weeds that lined the shore, and the wind cried through the brush houses, and no boat was safe on the water. Then Juan Tomas told among his neighbours, "Kino is gone. If he went to the sea, he is drowned by now." And after each trip among the neighbours, Juan Tomas come back with something borrowed. He brought a little woven straw bag of red beans and a gourd full of rice. He borrowed a cup of dried peppers and a block of salt, and he brought in a long working knife, 18 inches long and heavy as a small axe, a tool, a weapon. And when Kino saw this knife, his eyes lighted up, and he fondled the blade, his thumb tested the edge. The wind screamed over the gulf and turned the water white, and the mangroves plunged like frightened cattle, and a fine sandy dust rose from the land and hung in a stifling cloud over the sea. The wind drove off the clouds, and it skinned the sky clean and drifted the sand of the country like snow. Then Juan Tomas, when the evening approached, talked long with his brother. "Where will you go?" "To the north," said Kino. "I have heard that there are cities in the north." "Avoid the shore," said Juan Tomas. "They are making a party to search the shore. The men in the city will look for you. Do you still have the pearl?" "I have it," said Kino, "and I will keep it. I might have given it as a gift, but now it is my misfortune of my life, and I will keep it." His eyes were hard and cruel and bitter. Coyotito whimpered, and Juana muttered little magics over him to make him silent. "The wind is good," said Juan Tomas. "They'll be in their tracks." They left quietly in the dark before the moon had risen. The family stood formally in the house of Juan Tomas. Juana carried Coyotito on her back, covered and held in by her head shawl, and the baby slept, cheek turned sideways against her shoulder. The head shawl covered the baby, and one end of it came across Juana's nose to protect her from the evil night air. Juan Tomas embraced his brother with a double embrace and kissed him on both cheeks. "Go with God," he said, and it were like a death. "You will not give up the pearl?" "The pearl has become my soul," said Kino. "If I give it up, I shall lose my soul. Go thou also with God." That's the end of chapter 5. Maybe I spoke too soon saying that all of Kino's anger was justified. Then again, maybe not. The thing he does, the beating of his wife in the start of the thing is wrong, obviously. I'm not even going to attempt to defend that. It's violence done unfairly and cruelly to someone who couldn't defend herself. But, well, it's not unjustified, it's just misdirected. The anger is perfectly reasonable. The anger of being cheated of the pearl, of it driving his wife to betray him in this way. But he shouldn't be angry at her, he should be angry at the people who are doing it. But he doesn't have them to hand, so he misdirects it, and he does a cruel thing. And then the violence ensues, and he kills a man. And it doesn't break him, because killing that man is very much within the remit of a reasonable man. You can't argue that it wasn't fair and just of him to kill that man, attacked as he was, but it will bring him trouble anyway. And being in legal trouble is a very good way to be stripped of all of one's worldly possessions. All too easy for a piece of evidence to go missing, isn't it? Only takes the greed of one man, and look how many men have been greedy so far. And so they burn his house, and they beat him, and they rob him, or they try to rob him. And they turn his baby out of his box. They don't describe it, but in my head, they turn the baby out on the floor, which is a terrible cruelty. And they leave it in there, and they set the fire. Only Juana goes in to save him. So these men is pretty low and despicable, eh? And worst of all, it's vindicating, isn't it? It vindicates the fact that he was right. They were going to cheat him. They was going to rob him. And so he's proved right. He's proved to have made the correct call in his actions, or at least in his beliefs. And his actions have led to his family's ruin. They had to lose the life he knew. Being right is so often painful. The world does not like a man who is right. But I see the ads are about to start in 30 seconds, so I won't start the new chapter immediately. I'll take a moment and do a little bit of general reflection. There's not a whole lot of this left. There are, let's see, we're on page 68, and grand total there are 90 pages, so that's 22 pages, which I suspect is one chapter. So we're probably about done. Probably be no more than probably half an hour to read it, maybe 45 minutes when we do all the talking and telling and all that. We'll see. And that should have started now, so theoretically no one is hearing me because there are people trying to sell you things. And what do you want to bet that all the people who sell you those things are colluded to make sure they offer you the same price and get you to pay as much as they can get you to pay for it? I sometimes wish I could engage with the world more. It's tough being a rat, you know. I couldn't buy anything if I wanted to. No one would let me in a shop. No one would take any money out of that. Sure, maybe I can, you know, order something online and get it shipped to me, but I don't have any money to do it with, so it's no use, is it? So what do, you know? I'll steal everything I own because I got to. I scavenge it, but really that's just stealing, isn't it? Everyone owns everything has an owner nowadays. Even things that no one wants or needs or knows about, someone will have right to them. So everything I have I steal. All my little outfits stolen. All my books stolen. Or well, I guess not really, they're not mine, they're Lamps. I just put them here. So either I own nothing or everything I do own is stolen. And that's an hard thing to deal with sometimes. It makes you feel like you're less, like your place in the world is less, you know? But then other times it feels gratifying, you know? I mean, sure, it sucks that you don't have rights, that you don't have the chance to do things the way you'd like to do them, but at the same time you're not stuck or trapped in the same systems, you know? There's no one can tell me that I have to pay a certain amount for something because I can't pay anything for it, so I don't pay anything for it. No one can conspire against me. Sure, they can work to make things harder to steal, but they do that anyway. It's strange being a rat. You don't got no anchors. You're free, you're untethered. You're terribly wildly alone. Sometimes I feel so lucky I'm not stuck in this system. And sometimes I feel like the miserablest creature on earth. But the truth's probably somewhere in between, as it is for everyone, I'm sure. Oh, I appreciate that. But I meant more in like a metaphorical, you know. The way that the world is structured does not include me. There's a word for that. Disenfranchised, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, I'm aware that I'm not alone. Which I suppose actually, you've done this, you've answered in a literal sense to what I was doing, but actually you've made a very good point in the sense that community is the way we answer that question, isn't it? Even if a system isn't built for you, the way you overcome that is building systems of your own with the people around you. You can't control the pearl buyers, but you can control yourself. And you can talk with the people who live in the red huts, and you can hopefully work together with them. And if none of you will sell pearls to the pearl buyers, if they don't pay you good enough prices, then the pearl buyers don't got a lot of choice, do they? community action, I suppose. That's the way forward. I'll be honest, Nazca. They're not compared to the other voices I got in my head. I don't think you'd be an unwelcome presence. Mostly it's just Lamp yelling at me, and then there's the thing that lives in the book, whispering ideas of oblivion. And then there's two other ones that are a little bit weirder. One of them mostly tells stories, and the other one yells at me about how I should do things on the Bird website most of the time. So you know, you're fun. If you wanna come in and whisper, horrid or deep things into my ear while I'm sleeping, you're more than welcome anytime. And the same, of course, goes to Abbe and anyone else who's watching. You guys can invade my memories and secret corners of my mind anytime you like. Oh, Lamp is telling me that I should not make that promise in a sort of general sense because it's a bad idea, but I stand by it, at least for the people in chat. So yeah, but yeah, I think, well, ads is over now. I've done my little bit of commentary, waxed philosophical, and we'll resolve the point. So let's have a quick drink of water and then get back into it. Yes, Lamp, I do think Nazca would be a more pleasant voice in my head than you. Right. It feels weird talking back to Lamp, but I do appreciate it. Yeah. You and me against the world, buddy, or at least against Lamp. Now, I've got to start reading again or he will take my cheese away. So, Chapter 6. The wind blew fierce and strong, and it pelted them with bits of sticks, and sand and little rocks. Juan and Kino gathered their clothing tighter about them, and covered their noses, and went out into the world. The sky was brushed clean by the wind, and the stars were cold in a black scar. The two walked carefully, and they avoided the centre of the town, where some sleeper in a doorway might see them pass. But the town closed itself in against the night, and anyone who mowed about in the darkness, or moved about in the darkness, would be noticeable. Kino threaded his way around the edges of the city, and turned north by the stars, and found the rutted sandy road that led through the brushy country towards Loretto, where the miraculous Virgin has her station. Kino could feel the blown sand against his ankles, and he was glad, for he knew there would be no tracks. The little light from the stars made out for him the narrow road through the brushy country, and Kino could hear the pad of Juana's feet behind him. He went quickly and quietly, and Juana trotted behind him to keep up. Some ancient things stirred in Kino, through his fear of the dark and the devils that haunt the night. There came a rush of exhilaration. Some animal thing were moving in him, so that he was cautious and wary and dangerous. Some ancient thing out of the past of his people were alive in him. The wind were at his back, and the stars guided him. The wind cried and whisked in the brush, and the family went on monotonously, hour after hour. They passed no one and saw no one. At last, to their right, the waning moon arose, and when it come up, the wind died down, and the land was still. Now they could see the little road ahead of them, deep cut with sand drifted wheel tracks. With the wind gone, there would be footprints, but they were a good distance from the town, and perhaps their tracks might not be noticed. Kino walked carefully in a wheel rut, and Juana followed in his path. One big cart, going to the town in the morning, could wipe out every trace of their passage. All night they walked, and ne'er changed their pace. Once Coyotito awakened, and Juana shifted in front of her and soothed him until he went to sleep again. And the evils of the night were about them. The coyotes cried and laughed in the brush, and the owls screeched and hissed over their heads. And once some large animal lumbered away, crackling the undergrowth as it went. And Kino gripped the handle of the big working knife, and took a sense of protection from it. The music of the pearl were triumphant in Kino's head, and the quiet melody of the family underlay it, and they wove themselves into the soft pad and the sandaled feet in the dust. All night they walked, and in the first dawn Kino searched the roadside for a cover to lie in during the day. He found his place near the road, a little clearing where deer might have lain, and it was curtained thickly with dry, brittle trees that lined the road. And when Juana had seated herself and had settled to nurse the baby, Kino went back to the road. He broke a branch and carefully swept the footprints where they had turned from the roadway. And then, in the first light, he heard the creak of a wagon, and he crouched beside the road and watched an heavy two-wheeled cart go by, drawn by slouching oxen. And when it had passed out of sight, he went back to the roadway and looked at the rut and found that the footprints were gone. And again he swept out his traces and went back to Juana. She gave him the soft corn cakes Apollina had packed for them, and after a while she slept a little. But Kino sat on the ground and stared at the earth in front of him. He watched the ants moving, a little column of them nearly his foot, and he put his foot in their path. Then the column climbed over his instep and continued on its way, and Kino left his foot there and watched them move over it. The sun arose hotly. They were not near the gulf now, and the air was dry and hot, so the brush cricked with heat, and a good resinous smell come from it. And when Juana awakened, when the sun were high, Kino told her things she knew already. "Beware of that kind of tree there," he said, pointing. "Do not touch it, for if you do and then touch your eyes, it will blind you. And beware of the tree that bleeds. See that one over there? For if you break it, the red blood will flow from it, and it is evil luck." And she nodded and smiled a little at him, for she knew these things. "Will they follow us?" she asked. "Do you think they will try to find us?" "They will try," said Kino. "Whoever finds us will take the pearl, or they will try." And Juana said, "Perhaps the dealers were right, and the pearl has no value. Perhaps this has all been an illusion." Kino reached into his clothes and brought out the pearl. He let the sun play on it until it burned in his eyes. "No," he said. "They would not have tried to steal it if it had been valueless." "Do you know who attacked you? Was it the dealers?" "I do not know," he said. "I did not see them." He looked into the pearl to find his vision. "When we sell it, at last, I will have a rifle," he said, and he looked into the shining surface for his rifle. But he saw only another dark body on the ground, with shining blood dripping from its throat. And he said quickly, "We will be married in a great church." And in the pearl he saw Juana with her beaten face crawling home through the night. "Their son must learn to read," he said frantically. And there in the pearl, Coyotito's face, thick and feverish from the medicine. And Kino thrust the pearl back into his clothing, and the music of the pearl had become sinister in his ears, and it went woven with the music of evil. The hot sun beat on the earth, so that Kino and Juana moved into the lacy shade of the brush, and small grey birds scampered on the ground in the shade. In the heat of the day, Kino relaxed and covered his eyes with his hat, and wrapped his blanket about his face to keep the flies off, and he slept. But Juana did not sleep. She sat quiet as a stone, and her face was quiet. Her mouth was still swollen where Kino had struck her, and big flies buzzed around the cut on her chin. She sat as still as a sentinel, and when Coyotito awakened, she placed him on the ground in front of her and watched him wave his arms and kick his feet, and he smiled and gurgled at her until she smiled too. She picked up a little twig from the ground and tickled him, and she gave him water from the gourd she carried in her bundle. Kino stirred in the dream, and he cried out in a guttural voice, and his hand moved in a symbolic fighting. And then he moaned and sat up suddenly, his eyes wide and his nostrils flaring. He listened and heard only the crick and eat and the hiss of the distance. "What is it?" Juana asked. "Hush," he said. "You were dreaming." "Perhaps." But you were restless when he said. But you were restless. When she gave him a corn cake from her store, he paused in his chewing and listened. You were uneasy and nervous. He glanced over his shoulder. He lifted the big knife and felt its edge. When Coyotito gurgled on the ground, Kino said, "Keep him quiet." "What is the matter?" one asked. "I don't know." He listened again, an animal light in his eyes. He stood up then silently and crouched low. He threaded his way through the brush towards the road. But he did not step into the road. He crept into the cover of a thorny tree and peered out along the way he had come. And then he saw them moving along. His body stiffened and he drew down his head and peeked out from under the fallen branch. In the distance he could see 3 figures, 2 on foot and 1 on horseback. But he knew what they were, and a chill of fear went through him. Even in the distance he could see the 2 on foot moving slowly along, bent low to the ground. Here one would pause and look in the earth while the other joined him. They were the trackers. They could follow the trail of a bighorn sheep in the stone mountains. They were as sensitive as hounds. Here he and Juana might have stepped out of the wheel rut, and these people from the inland, these hunters, could follow, could read a broken straw or a little tumbled pile of dust. Behind them on an horse were a dark man, his nose covered with a blanket, and across his saddle a rifle gleamed in the sun. Kino lay as rigid as the tree limb. He barely breathed, and his eyes went to the place where he had swept out the track. Even the sweeper might be a message to the trackers. He knew these inland hunters. In a country where there were little game, they managed to live because of their ability to hunt. And they were hunting him. They scuttled over the ground like animals and found a sign and crouched over it while the horsemen waited. The trackers whined a little, like excited dogs on a warning trail. Kino slowly drew his big knife to his hand and made it ready. He knew what he must do. If the trackers found the swept place, he must leap for the horseman, kill him quickly and take the rifle. That was his only chance in the world. And as the three drew nearer the road, Kino had dug little pits with his sandaled toes so that he could leap out without warning, so his feet would not slip. He had only a little vision under the fallen limb. Now Juana, back in her hidden place, heard the pad of the horse's hooves, and Coyotito gurgled. She took him up quickly and put him under her shawl, and gave him a breast until he was silent. When the trackers come near, Kino could see only their legs, and only the legs of the horse from under the fallen branch. He saw the dark, horny feet of the men, and their ragged white clothes, and he heard the creak of leather of the saddle, and the clink of spurs. The trackers stopped at the swept place and studied it, and the horseman stopped. The horse flung his head up against the bit, and the bit roller clicked under his tongue, and the horse snorted. Then the dark trackers turned and studied the horse, and watched his ears. Kino were not breathing, but his back arched a little, and the muscles of his arm and leg stood out with tension, and a line of sweat formed on his upper lip. For a long moment the trackers bent over the road, and then they moved on slowly, studying the ground ahead of them, and the horseman moved after them. The trackers scuttled along, stopping, looking and hurrying on. They would be back, Kino knew. They would be circling and searching, peeping, stooping, and they would come back sooner or later to his covered track. He slid backwards and did not bother to cover his tracks. He could not. Too many little signs were there, too many broken twigs and scuffed places and displaced stones. And there were a panic in Kino now, a panic of flight. The trackers would find his trail, he knew it. There was no escape except in flight. He edged away from the road and went quickly and silently to the hidden place where Juana was. She looked at him in question. "Trackers," he said, "come." And then an helplessness and an hopelessness swept over him, and his face went black and his eyes were sad. Perhaps I should let them take me. Instantly Juana were on her feet and her hand lay on his arm. "You have the pearl," she cried hoarsely. "Do you think they would take you back alive to say they had stolen it?" His hand strayed limply to the place where the pearl was hidden under his clothes. "They will find it," he said weakly. "Come," she said, "come." And when he did not respond, "Do you think they would let me live? Do you think they would let the little one here live?" How Godin struck into his brain. His lips snarled and his eyes were fierce again. "Come," he said. "We'll go into the mountains. Maybe we can lose them in the mountains." Frantically he gathered the gourds and the little bags that were their property. Kino carried a bundle in his left hand, but the big knife swung free in his right hand. He parted the brush for Juana, and they hurried to the west, towards the Arstone Mountains. They trotted quickly through the tangle of undergrowth. This was panic flight. Kino did not try to conceal his passage as he trotted, kicking the stones, knocking the telltale leaves from the little trees. The Arse sun streamed down on the dry creek and earth, so that even the vegetation ticked in protest. But ahead were the naked granite mountains, rising out of erosion rubble, and standing monolithic against the sky. And Kino ran for the R place, as nearly all animals do when they are pursued. This land was waterless, furrowed with the cacti which could store water, and with the great rooted brush which could reach deep into the earth for a little moisture and get along on very little. and underfoot were not soil but broken rocks split into small cubes, great slabs, but none of it were water around it. Little tufts of sad, dry grass grew between the stones, grass that had sprouted with one single rain and headed, dropped its seed and died. Horned toads watched the family go by and turn their little pivoting dragon heads, and now and then a great jackrabbit, disturbed in his shade, bumped away and hid behind the nearest rock. The singing heat lay over the desert country, and it led the stone mountains looked cool and welcoming. And Kino fled. He knew what would happen. A little way along the road, the trackers would become aware that they had missed the path, and they would come back, searching and judging. And in a little while, they would find the place where Kino and Juana had rested. From there, it would be easy for them. These little stones, these fallen leaves and the whipped branches, the scuffed places where a foot had slipped. Kino could see them in his mind, slipping along the track, Juana a little with eagerness, and beyond them, dark and half disinterested, the horseman with the rifle. His work would come last, for he would not take them back. Oh, the music of evil sang loud in Kino's head now. It sang with the whine of heat, and with the dry ringing of snake rattles. It were not large and overwhelming now, but secret and poisonous, and the pounding of his heart gave it undertone and rhythm. The wave began to rise, and as it did the rocks grew larger, but now Kino had put a little distance between his family and the trackers. Now, on the first rise, he rested. He climbed the great boulder and looked back over the shimmering country, but he could not see his enemies, not even the tall horseman riding through the brush. Juana had squatted in the shade of the boulder. She raised her bottle of water to Coyotito's lips. His little dried tongue sucked greedily at it. She looked up at Kino when he come back. She saw him examining her ankles, cut and scratched from the stones and brush, and she covered them quickly with her skirt. Then she handed the bottle to him, but he shook his head. Her eyes were bright in her tired face. Kino moistened his cracked lips with his tongue. "Juana," he said, "I will go on and you will aid. I will lead them into the mountains, and when they are gone past, you will go north to Loreto, or to Santa Rosalia. Then, if I can escape, I will come to you. It is the only safe way." She looked full into his eyes for a moment. "No," she said. "We go with you." "I can go faster alone," he said harshly. "You'll put the little one in more danger if you go with me." "No," said Juana. "You must. It is the wise thing and it is my wish," he said. "No," said Juana. He looked then for weakness in her face, for fear or irresolution, and there were none. Her eyes were very bright. He shrugged his shoulders helplessly then, but he had taken strength from her. When they moved on, it were no longer panic flight. The country, as it rose towards the mountains, changed rapidly. Now there were long outcroppings of granite with deep crevices between them, and Kino walked on bare, unmarkable stone when he could, and leapt from ledge to ledge. He knew that wherever the trackers had lost the path, they must circle and lose time before they found it again, and so he did not go straight for the mountains any more. He moved in zigzags, and sometimes he cut back to the south and left a sign, and then went towards the mountains over a bare stone again. And the path rose steeply now, so that he panted a little as he went. The sun moved downward towards the bare stone teeth of the mountains, and Kino set his direction for a dark and shadowy cleft in the range. If there were any water at all, it would be there where he could see, even in the distance, a hint of foliage. And if there were any passage through the smooth stone range, it would be by this same deep cleft. It had its danger, for the trackers would think of it too, but the empty water bottle did not let that consideration enter. And as the sun lowered, Kino and Juana struggled wearily up the steep slope towards the cleft. High in the grey stone mountains, under a frowning peak, a little spring bubbled out of a rupture in the stone. It was fed by shade-preserved snow in the summer, and now and then it died completely, and bare rocks and dry algae were on its bottom. But nearly always it gushed out, cold and clean and lovely. In the times when the quick rains fell, it might become fresher and send its column of white water crashing down the mountain cleft, but nearly always it were a lean little spring. It bubbled out into a pool, and then fell 100 feet to another pool, and this one overflowed and dropped again, so it continued down and down until it came to the rubble of the upland, and then it disappeared altogether. There weren't much left of it then anyway, for every time it fell over an escarpment, the thirsty air drank it, and it splashed from the pool the dry vegetation. The animals from miles around come to drink at the little pools, and the wild sheep and the deer and the pumas and raccoons and the mice all come to drink, and the birds which spent the day in the brushland come up at night to the little pools that were like steps in the mountain cleft. Beside this tiny stream, wherever enough earth collected for root hold, colonies of plants grew, wild grape and little palms, maidenhair fern, hibiscus, and tall pampas grass with feathery rods raised above the spike leaves. And in the pool lived frogs and water skaters, and water worms crawled on the bottom of the pool. Everything that loved water come to these few shallow places. The cats took their prey there, and strewed feathers and lapped water through their bloody teeth. The little pools were places of laugh because of the water, and places of killing because of the water too. The lowest step where the stream collected before it tumbled down 100 feet and disappeared into the rubbly desert were a little platform of stone and sand. Only a pencil of water fell into the pool, but it were enough to keep the pool full, and to keep the ferns green in the underhang of the cliff, and wild grape climbed the stone mountain, and all manner of little plants found comfort here. The freshlets had made a small sandy beach through which the pool flowed, and bright green watercress grew in the damp sand. The beach were cut and scarred and padded by the feet of animals that had come to drink and won. The sun had passed over the stone mountains when Kino and Juana struggled up the steep broken slope and come at last to the water. From this step they could look out over the sun-beaten desert to the blue gulf in the distance. They came utterly wearied of the pool, and Juana slumped to her knees, and the first washed Coyotito's face and then filled her bottle and gave him a drink. And the baby were weary and petulant, and he cried softly until Juana gave him a breast, and then he gurgled and chuckled against her, and clucked against her. Kino drank long and thirstily at the pool. For a moment then he stretched out beside the water and relaxed all his muscles and watched Juana feeding the baby. And then he got to his feet and went to the edge of the step where the water slipped over, and he searched the distance carefully. His eyes set on a point and he became rigid. Far down the slope he could see the two trackers. They were little more than dots or scurrying ants, and behind them a larger ant. Juana had turned to look at him, and she saw his back stiffen. "How far?" she asked quietly. "They will be here by evening," said Kino. He looked up the long steep chimney of the cleft where the water came down. "We must go west," he said, and his eyes searched the stone shoulder behind the cleft. And 30 feet up on the grey shoulder he saw a series of little erosion caves. He slipped off his sandals and clambered up them, gripping the bare stone with his toes, and he looked into the shallow caves. They was only a few feet deep, wind-hollowed scoops, but they sloped slightly downwards and back. Kino crawled into the largest one and lay down, and knew that he could not be seen from the outside. Quickly he went back to Juana. "You must go up there. Perhaps they will not find us there," he said. Without question she filled her water bottle to the top, and then Kino helped her up to the shallow cave, and brought up the package of food and passed them to her, and Juana sat in the cave entrance and watched him. She saw that he did not try to erase their tracks in the sand. Instead he climbed up the brush cliff beside the water, clawing and tearing at the ferns and wild grape as he went, and when he had climbed 100 feet to the next beach, he came down again. He looked carefully at the smooth rock shoulder towards the cave to see that there were no trace of passage, and last he climbed up and crept into the cave beside Joanna. "When they go up," he said, "we will slip away, down the lowlands again. I am afraid only that the baby may cry. You must see he does not cry." "He will not cry," she said, and she raised the baby's face to her own and looked into his eyes, and he stared solemnly back at her. "He knows," said Juana. Now Kino lay in the cave entrance, his chin braced on his crossed arms, and he watched the blue shadows of the mountain move out across the brushy desert below, until it reached the gulf, and the long twilight of the shadow were over the land. The trackers were long in coming, as though they had trouble with the trail Kino had left. It was dusk when they came at last to the little pool, and all three were on foot now, for an horse could not climb the last steep slope. From above there were thin figures in the evening. The two trackers scurried about on the little beach, and they saw Kino's progress up the cliff before they drank. The man with the rifle sat down and rested himself, and the trackers squatted near him, and in the evening the points of their cigarettes glowed and receded, and then Kino could see that they were eating, and the soft mutter of their voices come to him. Then darkness fell, deep and black in the mountain cleft. The animals that used the pools come near and smelled men here, men there, and drifted away again into the darkness. He heard a murmur behind him, one all whispering, "Coyotito." She was begging him to be quiet. Kino heard the baby whimper, and he knew from the muffled sound that Juana had covered his face with her shawl. Down on the beach a match flared, and in its momentary light Kino saw that two of the men were sleeping, curled up like dogs, while the third watched. And he saw the glint of the rifle in the match light, and then the match died. It left a picture on Kino's eyes. He could see it, just how each man was, two sleeping curled up and the third squatting in the sand with the rifle between his knees. Kino moved silently back into the cave. One of his eyes were two sparks reflecting a low star. Kino crawled quietly close to her and put his lips near to her cheek. "There is a way," he said. "But they will kill you." "If I get first to the one with the rifle," Kino said. "I must get to him first, and then I will be alright. Two are sleeping." Her hand crept out from under her shawl and gripped his arm. "They will see your wet clothes in the starlight." "No," he said, "and I must go before moonrise." He searched for a soft word and then gave it up. "If they kill me," he said, "lie quietly, and when they are gone away to Loreto." His hand shook a little, holding his wrist. Her hand shook a little, holding his wrist. "There is no choice," he said. "It is the only way. They will find us in the morning." Her voice trembled a little. "Go with God," she said. He peered closely at her, and he could see her large eyes. His hand fumbled out and found the baby, and for a moment his palm lay on Coyotito's head. And then Kino raised his hand and touched Juana's cheek, and she held her breath. Against the sky in the cave entrance, Juana could see that Kino had taken off his white clothes, but dirty and ragged though they would show up against the dark night. His own brown skin were a better protection for him. And then she saw how he looked. And then she saw how he hooked his amulet net string about the horn handle of his great knife, so that it hung down in front of him and left both his hands free. He did not come back to her. For a moment his body was black in the cave entrance, crouched and silent, and then he was gone. Juana moved to the entrance and looked out. She peered like an owl from the hole in the mountain, and the baby slept under the blanket on her back, his face turned sideways against her neck and shoulder. She could feel his warm breath against her skin, and Juana whispered her combination of prayer and magic, her Hail Marys and her ancient intercessions against the black, unhuman things. The night seemed a little less dark when she looked out, and to the east there were lightning in the sky, down near the horizon where the moon would show. And looking down she could see the cigarettes of the man on watch. Kino edged like a slow lizard down the smooth rock shoulder. He had turned his neck string so that the great knife hung down from his back and could not clash against the stone. His spread fingers gripped the mountain, and his bare toes found support through contact, and even his chest lay against the stone, so that he would not slip. For any sound, a rolling pebble or a sigh, a little slip of flesh on rock would rouse the watchers below. Any sound that were not germane to the night would make them alert. But the night were not silent. The little tree frogs that lived near the stream twittered like birds, and the unmetallic ringing of the cicadas filled the mountain cleft. And Kino's own music was in his head, the music of the enemy, low and pulsing, nearly asleep. But the song of family had become as fierce and sharp and feline as the snarl of a female puma. The family song were alive now, and driving him down on the dark enemy. The harsh cicada seemed to take up its melody, and the twittering tree frog called little phrases of it. And Kino crept silently as a shadow down the smooth mountain face. One bare foot moved a few inches, and the toes touched the stone and gripped, and the other foot a few inches, and then the palm of one hand a little downward, and the other hand, until the whole body, without seeming to move, had moved. Kino's mouth were open so that even his breath would make no sound, for he knew that he were not invisible. If the watcher, sensing movement, looked at the dark place against the stone which was his body, you could see him. Kino must move so slowly he would not draw the watcher's eye. It took him a long time to reach the bottom and to crouch behind a little dwarf palm. His heart thundered in his chest, and his hands and face were wet with sweat. He crouched and took great, slow, long breaths to calm himself. Only 20 feet separated him from the enemy now, and he tried to remember the ground between. Were there any stone which might trip him in his rush? He kneaded his legs against cramp and found that his muscles were jerking after the long tension. And then he looked apprehensively to the east. The moon would rise in a few moments now, and he must attack before it rose. He could see the outline of the watcher, but the sleeping men were below his vision. It was the watcher Kino must find quickly and without hesitation. Silently he drew the amulet string over his shoulder and loosened the loop from the horn handle of his great knife. He was too late. As he rose from his crouch, the silver edge of the moon slipped above the eastern horizon, and Kino sank back behind this bush. It was an old and ragged moon, but it threw a hard light, an hard shadow into the mountain cleft, and now Kino could see the seated figure of the watcher on the little bench beside the pool. The watcher gazed full at the moon, and then he lighted another cigarette, and the match illuminated his dark face for a moment. There could be no waiting now. When the watcher turned his head, Kino must leap. His legs were as tight as wound springs. And then from above came a little murmuring cry. The watcher turned his head to listen, and then he stood up, and one of the sleepers stirred on the ground and awakened, and asked quietly, "What is it?" "I don't know," said the watcher. "It sounded like a cry, almost like a human, like a baby." The man who had been sleeping said, "You can't tell. Some coyote bitch with a litter. I've heard a coyote pup cry like a baby." A sweat rolled in drops down Kino's forehead and fell into his eyes and burned them. The little cry come again, and the watcher looked up the sides of the hill to the dark cave. "Coyote, maybe," he said, and Kino heard the harsh click as he cocked the rifle. "If it's a coyote, this will stop it," the watcher said as he raised the gun. Kino were in mid-leap when the gun crashed and the barrel flash made a picture in his eyes. The great knife swung and crunched hollowly. It bit through the neck and deep into the chest, and Kino were a terrible machine now. He grasped the rifle even as he wrenched free his knife. His strength and his movement and his speed were a machine. He whirled and struck the head of the seated man like a melon. The third man scrabbled away like a crab, slipped into the pool, and then he began to climb frantically. To climb up the cliff with the water penciled down. His hands and feet threshed in the tangle of the wild grapevine, and he whimpered and gibbered as he tried to get up. But Kino had become as cold and deadly as steel. Deliberately he threw the lever of the rifle, then he raised the gun and aimed deliberately and fired. He saw his enemy tumble backwards into the pool, and Kino strode to the water. In the moonlight he could see frantic, frightened eyes, and Kino aimed and fired between the eyes. And then Kino stood uncertainly. Something was wrong. Some signal were trying to get through to his brain. Tree frogs and cicadas were silent now. And then Kino's brain cleared from its red concentration, and he knew the sound, the keen moaning, rising hysterical cry from the little cave on the side of the stone mountain. The cry of death. Everyone in La Paz remembers the return of the family. There may be some old ones who saw it. Those whose fathers and whose grandfathers told them remember it nevertheless. It is an event that happened to everyone. It was late in the golden afternoon when the first little boys ran hysterically into town and spread the word that Kino and Juana were coming back, and everyone hurried to see them. The sun was setting towards the western mountains, and the shadow on the ground were long, and perhaps that was what left a deep impression on all those who saw them. The two come from the rutted country road into the city, and they were not walking in single file, Kino and Ed and Juana behind, as usual, but side by side. The sun was behind them, and their long shadows stalked ahead, and they seemed to carry 2 towers of darkness with them. Kino had a rifle across his arm, and Juana carried her shawl like a sack over her shoulder, and in it were a small, limp, heavy bundle. The shawl were crusted with dry blood, and the bundle swayed a little as she walked. Her face were hard and lined and leathery with fatigue, and with the tightness with which she fought fatigue, and her wide eyes stared inwards on herself. She were as remote and removed as heaven. Kino's lips were thin and his jaw tight, and the people say that he carried fear with him, that he were as dangerous as a rising storm. The people say the two seemed to be removed from human experience, that they had gone through pain and had come out on the other side, that there were almost a magical protection about them, and those people who had rushed to see them crowded back and let them pass and did not speak to them. Kino and Juana walked through the city as though it were not there. Their eyes glanced neither right nor left, nor up nor down, but stared only straight ahead. Their legs moved a little jerkily, like well-made wooden dolls, and they carried pillars of black fear about them. And as they walked through the stone and plaster, city brokers peered at them from barred windows, and servants put one eye to the slitted gate, and mothers turned their faces of their youngest children inward against their skirts. Kino and Juana strode side by side through the stone and plaster city, and down among the brush houses, and their neighbours stood back and let them pass. Juan Tomas raised his hand in greeting, and did not say the greeting, and left his hand in the air for a moment uncertainly. In Kino's ears the song of the family were as fierce as a cry. He were immune and terrible, and his song had become a battle cry. They trudged past the burned square where their house had been without even looking at it. They cleared the brush that edged the beach and picked their way down to the shore towards the water, and they did not look towards Kino's broken canoe. And when they came to the water's edge, they stopped and stared out over the gulf, and then Kino laid the rifle down, and he dug among his clothes, and then he held the great pearl in his hand. He looked into its surface, and it was grey and ulcerous. Evil faces peered from it into his eyes, and he saw the light of burning. And in the surface of the pearl he saw the frantic eyes of the man in the pool, and in the surface of the pool he saw Coyotito lying in a little cave, with the top of his head shot away. And the pearl was ugly. It was grey like a malignant growth, and Kino heard the music of the pearl, distorted and insane. Kino's hand shook a little, and he turned slowly to Juana and held the pearl out to her. She stood beside him, still holding the dead bundle over her shoulder. She looked at the pearl in his hand for a moment, and then she looked into Kino's eyes and said softly, "No, you." And Kino drew back his arm and flung the pearl with all his might. Kino and Juana watched it go, winking and glimmering under the setting sun. They saw the little splash in the distance, and they stood side by side watching the place for a long time. And the pearl settled into the lovely green water and dropped towards the bottom. The waving branches of the algae called to it and beckoned to it. The lights on the surface were green and lovely. It settled down to the sand bottom among the fern-like plants. Above the surface of the water a green mirror, and the pearl lay on the floor of the sea. A crab scampering over the bottom raised a little cloud of sand, and when it settled the pearl were gone, and the music of the pearl drifted to a whisper and disappeared. And that's the end of the pearl. Well, that's 2 for 2 on Steinbeck novels, completely destroying me at the end of them. So yeah, that was devastating. Right, what can we say about that then? Well, first things first. First things first, what? Well, first things first, I don't really think Kino's ever in the wrong, other than in the one moment where he strikes his wife. Everything he does in a perfectly understandable manner. A perfectly reasonable man, doing what he can to try and make life better for his family. And he suffers for it. Of course he suffers for it. And we see the terrible, what do you call it? The terrible return. The first wish that breaks the, what was it? Breaks the barrier, breaks the horizon. The impossible dream of a rifle. Eh? He gets it in the end. And all it costs him is everything. That's the price of a man who dares to wish in a world that does not wish him to. A man hunted like dog. His family hunted with him. Men who will kill them no matter what they do. A baby that cannot be kept quiet, because you can't keep a baby quiet. Because a baby's instinct is to cry out. And what it cost him, eh? A single bullet. And Kino becoming a terrible thing, a machine of death and violence. Kino who you've never seen win a fight. Who we've seen beaten 3 times. Kills 3 men like it's nothing. The song of the family chanting in his ears. Moving into a red-headed machine. Red-minded machine. Quick to destroy as anything, and still not enough. And the strangest thing is, I still don't know that Kino did anything wrong, other than, again, striking his wife. I suppose you could say that his wishing was wrong. That the sermon is true, and that a man trying to move beyond his station is an affront to God. If that's true, then what kind of world do we live in, huh? What is a man to do? Live all his days, consigned to his fate? No, that's the tragedy, really. He did everything right, and it still cost him everything. The world is terribly cruel. It can be terribly cruel, and especially the poorest is terribly cruel. You can do everything right, and it can still cost you everything. And you can get your first wish and still be left empty and hollow. And he'll never know the truth, will he? His son will never read, so he'll never know what's in the books or when he's being cheated. There is no change except that a man has a rifle instead of a boat. And who knows what will come of it. I don't think it matters. Certainly doesn't matter to Kino. I'm not sure I like Steinbeck. That's not to say they're not good, they're very good. The way he talks and the way he describes things, the floating sort of sense of the world around, the way the golf shifts the world into illusions, even the little pools of life. The way he describes it is vivid and beautiful, but... well, it's not that it's not my style. The style is lovely. It's very much my style. But of the 2 stories I've read of his, both of them are devastating. When I say I don't like them, I don't mean that they're not good. I mean that they're very miserable. I think I said actually when I read Mice and Men, that a book doesn't necessarily need to be enjoyable to be good. And again, The Pearl is a very solid class in that. Very good book, very strong story. And emotionally devastating. But I may be being unfair about it. I'm sure that if I give it time to settle, and for the emotional impact to fade a bit, I'll think I like this book. Even now there are parts of it I think I like. And I think generally very positively of it. But by God, that was a punch in the gut. By God. Still. Where? I said still, and I was like, yeah, I'll then sum up what this book is about, but it's hard to sum up, isn't it? It's not a morality tale really, because I don't think Keanu does much wrong other than again striking his wife. And he's not punished for that. Maybe you could argue it's a morality tale, but if it is, it's a moral that I disagree with. It's a tragedy, really. A tragic story. A thing that happened. Harsh, isn't it? Let me have a drink and see if I can think of anything more to say while I do. No, I don't think I can. Not really. I suppose we could talk a little about the setting, about the Gulf. I'm not going to say Mexico for sure, but I'm assuming somewhere in Latin America. The people exploited by, I'm assuming it's, what you call it, native South Americans against the white colonists and, well, yeah, authority and gunpowder. Another way to see it, I suppose, a frame of the cruelty of colonialism and its impacts even hundreds of years on. But even that feels a bit off, really. It's not an untrue thing, but it is a more distant thing. Makes things feel divorced from the tragedy of them. It's a personal tragedy, really. And engage with it in another light, it seems to sort of lessen it, deny it some of its impact. There's a lot to be said for it, but I maintain it's a very good story. It might even be better than Mice and Men, or at least maybe a little bit tighter. But well, I think I like my stories a bit happier than that. Still, it's a book that I think I'm glad to have read, even if I can't say that I enjoyed the reading of it. At least not. Well, that's not even fair. I enjoyed most of the reading of it. I'd say I enjoyed the whole first half of it, and most of the second half. Just, I don't know. I'm having an emotional reaction to it, and yeah, that should be it. Right. Well, but yeah, I don't think I have anything more to say really. And I don't have anything more planned to read tonight, so I suppose without much further ado, I shall call it there. Thank you to everyone who's come by to watch, most especially Naska and Abby who've been talking, but anyone who's been lurking, I do very much appreciate it. It's always good to have people here who experience these with me. You're very welcome, Naska. I do enjoy reading these, even when they are like this. But yeah, you're very welcome too, Abby. Once again, thank you for being here so regularly. It means a lot to me. Yeah. My throat's still feeling pretty good, so we'll probably be back tomorrow. Maybe with some ghost stories. I don't know. I kind of want to break into some of the other novels I got, but we'll see how we feel. Yeah, thanks, Sue. Thanks everyone for coming by. I hope you have a good rest of your day or evening or wherever time it is for you. And as always, ta-ra.